What's up, guys? It's me, Coach Mills here, and in this video we're going to be breaking down 6 underrated heroes that you might not think are good, but actually can be incredibly powerful in the right situations to dominate this meta. So we're going to break all 6 underrated heroes down, 2 for every single role, but do me a huge solid and smash the like, subscribe if you enjoy the content, and private coaching will be in the description down below. Now, the first character that we actually got to talk about is the DPS Mei. Mei seems a little out of place when we talk about Overwatch 2. She was very powerful at walling off choke points, freezing targets, isolating a Rhine, for example, and killing them. But now, Mei just feels a bit strange, and she has for quite some time. However, in this meta in particular, Mei can get a ton of value against many of the top tanks. When we think about characters like Ramattra, having something that can not only delay or stop a Ramattra pushing forward, trying to ult in or just nemesis form in, she can do that. And in addition to that, if you wall off a Ramattra, it's really easy for you to get away from the Ramattra to stop the ult entirely. On top of that, your ultimate is a great counter to Ramattra's ultimate and very, very powerful on a lot of the payload maps. And if we talk about some of the other tank matchups, let's consider a matchup like Wrecking Ball. Not only can the Wrecking Ball not really kill you very easily, you have more health, you can slow him, you have ice block, but you can also wall him off if he ever goes into tight corridors. And Mei is kind of like a very, very good anti-tank pick right now. In addition to that, there are DPS characters seeing a lot of play like Tracer that make him one-shot headshot, so it gives you a lot of counterplay in those powerful matchups. And all in all, Mei is just incredibly slept on and underrated. Practice your icicles, grind the character, and especially if your game sense is higher than average, you can pull off some extraordinary things with this character, and I think it's a great character to learn how to flex to. Now, next up, let's talk about Lucio. And you might be like, whoa. Lucio is not underrated, but really, Lucio has kind of shined away from the limelight, right? Mercy, Kiriko, Ana, even Zen, all these characters are getting the limelight. But what about poor Lucio? Where does he belong? But the thing about Lucio, and one of the reasons why he's so good in ranked always, is because of how flexible you can be with this character. You can play aggressive with the dive. You can actually force DPS off of aggressive angles as well. Like if a solo soldier is pushing an angle, a little bit of damage and you booping him away can get him to run back to his team, as long as you don't overextend or overstay your welcome. In addition to all these things, Lucio is a fantastic peeler, capable of disrupting a ton of characters by booping them up into the air so that it's like Duck Hunt, or booping them away from your teammates. And especially if you have a tank on your team that you can enable, someone like Ramattra, Orisa, or a Roadhog, Lucio just becomes incredibly powerful. And there are DPS that are really good right now that Lucio enable. Specifically, Cassidy works really well with Lucio right now, like bread and butter. And with a lot of the maps actually playing into Brawl, like you can play a Brawl comp on many of the Koth maps or some of the individuals out of the trio and maps like King's Row, I think that Lucio is a bit slept on right now and definitely a character that you can make work in many different situations. Now, the next character that we got to talk about that is a bit underrated, I think, is Diva. Diva is really powerful and actually surprisingly one of the best tanks in this meta. Even though she hasn't really gotten any changes, she's slowly but surely fit the meta in a very, very interesting way. So let's talk about what Diva can do. Diva can peel and be aggressive almost simultaneously and can play with a wide range of different compositions. So if a ball slams down on your team, you can peel that. You can DM your team, keeping them alive. If there's a DPS that's taking it off angle or on the high ground, Diva can punish that and push that. And especially when we see maps like New Bonnie back in the map pool, Diva becomes better and better, being able to abuse that high ground. And a lot of the best characters that are being played right now, like Tracer and many of the strong hit scans like Cassidy and Ashe, Diva either plays well with as a peeler or plays well with as a diver, and the flexibility there is insane. And I really think that Diva is one of the best tanks right now silently. And especially if you get good at tracking enemy cooldowns, you can do things like actually punish a Kiriko, chase it down, harass and deny a Pharah Mercy, which is one of the hardest things for tanks to deal with, period. Every tank player knows that a Pharah Mercy is like the worst thing for you to see, but you can actually pressure them out. You can chase down Mercies, you can deny high ground from hit scan DPS, shut down Cassidy's. I mean, the list goes on and on with this character. Incredibly flexible, incredibly powerful, definitely worth you grinding and learning this character, and super underrated right now. Now, this next character is gonna get me a little bit of flack. I already know it. I already know it's gonna get a little bit of flack, so with that out of the way, I think Genji is a bit underrated. And I kind of don't even want to say this because we all want Genji buffs. You know we all want Genji buffs, but Genji is actually surprisingly good when you get into a meta that has Doomfist flying around and has Divas and Wrecking Balls flying around. You see, Genji pairs really well with dive characters, and a Wrecking Ball in particular, Genji is fantastic with, and Genji is fairly good against a lot of the hit scan options, characters like Soldier, characters like Cass, and even Ashe. As long as they're not being mercy pocketed, Genji can deal with them alone, and if they are being mercy pocketed, a coordinated dive with a ball or a doom, you can still get the job done. On top of that, Nano Blade is still a very powerful combo, especially when we're seeing a bit less ultimates that can be defensive ultimates outside of Transcendence, but you can kill through Transcendence with the slash dash combo. And the most important thing that you need to understand is that Zen is being played a lot. Like, Zen is seeing quite a bit of play, more play than ever, and Genji is one of the best natural counters to this character outside of perhaps Tracer, and I think Genji is actually a little bit better at killing Zen than Tracer is. And very similar to Diva, high ground maps like Nubani are gonna be favored for a character like Genji far more than a character like Tracer, because Tracer has to route around the map to kind of get in position, and you can't abuse that high low ground like Genji and Diva can. So it all comes back around to say that Genji is actually pretty decent, even though he's not like even close to the best DPS by any stretch of the imagination. But I do think that he's playable in the right comps against the right comps. I think that if you're a good Genji, you can abuse a certain type of composition, force the opponents to swap, and then you have a swap in your back pocket. So you can kind of mess around with you swapping and shutting down the enemy team, but there are comps that just completely destroy Genji, so keep that in mind. Now, the next thing that we need to talk about, the next character that I think is pretty underrated, is actually Mora. Mora is actually a pretty decent character for a couple of reasons. Now, I don't typically talk very fondly of Mora, and one of the reasons I don't is because Mora doesn't provide any utility outside of damage. Like, think about speed boost, Discord Orb, Resurrect, damage boost, nade, Suzu, sleep. I mean, the list goes on and on. These are all pieces of utility that don't just have to do with healing or damage, but Mora doesn't have that. She has healing and damage. However, something about Mora that's really strong right now is that the damage aspect of Mora can be valid when you're pairing it with characters like Wrecking Ball, when you are cutting off DPS that are on off angles or DPS trying to get overly aggressive. The damage aspect of Mora can threaten a lot of these DPSs and force them away, and especially when you're dying a lot to coordinated dives, Mora can kind of basically stay alive no matter what the enemy is doing. Now, the thing that you have to make sure that you're doing on Mora is you cannot just be a pure heal bot. And I know people are already going to riot and say, my Moras are DPS only Moras, but a Mora needs to be adding a lot of damage-based value to the team fight if she's going to be justifiable to be picked, because the damage she gets, the impact she gets, the damage that she outputs, and the pressure she outputs has to be equivalent to the value that you would get with some other amount of utility that you could have on a different character. On top of that, Mora can live, so if you combine the two things, Mora is more survivable, and that damage can really create opportunities for your team. Like, imagine a slam with a Genji dash and a Mora damage orb. Now we're cooking. So yeah, there's a couple of situations where I think Mora is actually pretty underrated. And on top of that, if we talk about a brawl with like potentially Junker Queen and Lucio, Mora can be a great character to help enable a brawl and go with a Lucio. Y'all all go in very aggressively. Mora pumps out a ton of heals and can deal damage at the same time and help the brawl along. Now, last but certainly not least, let's talk about Winston. This character is incredibly slept on. A lot of people think that Winston is just an inferior freaking Wrecking Ball, but that's just not true. Winston is very, very strong for one key reason. Winston's bubble is still a very powerful piece of utility. Being able to cut off enemy supports, Zenyatta's and Ana's, is very, very strong, and just slamming them is not always the same thing, because bubble not only allows you to cut them off from the front line, but it also makes it so your teammates are more survivable when they're around you. So when coordinated dives happen, Winston's bubble can help your Tracer survive, help whatever else is coming with you survive, and that's a really big deal. Now, one thing about Winston, though, is he's more in and out. He's a lot easier to punish than a Wrecking Ball is. However, if your engagements are very sharp, I think you can get potentially even more value. And against a lot of the compositions that are seeing play with the Wrecking Ball, Winston is good against them. So you can play Winston as like a counter wrecking ball diver, where in the dive mirror, you're a bit better at dealing with their DPS than the wrecking ball is, where oftentimes a DPS can ignore a wrecking ball for the most part, where a DPS cannot ignore a Winston in any stretch of the imagination. So I think that while Winston is harder to play, easier to get punished for, if you play him correctly, you make sure to not hard engage in comps that can actually deal with you without having your leap. So you're just going to walk forward against compositions that can shut you down, and you're going to have your bubble to create space, and then you're going to be able to leap away until there's an opportunity or you have your ultimate. But against compositions that are dive heavy, you could be much more liberal with how you jump in, how you cut supports off, and you can use your bubble to help your team not only get kills in the dive, but also stay alive. So yeah, I think Winston is really, really underrated, and definitely a character that can be very, very powerful in the right hands. But these are my 6 characters that I think are a bit slept on, not properly evaluated with the community currently, and I think that they all need more love. But you let me know down below what underrated hero that you have, what makes your list and why. Let me know down below, and do me a huge solid and smash that like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content. Thank you so much for coming by, and I'll see you next time.